Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with the Addy stories. Addy Surprise, Chapter 2, Something Pretty. Early on Saturday morning, Addy set out on her errands and deliveries for Mrs. Ford. She brought a bill to a customer on Society Hill. Then she went to the dry goods store a few blocks away to pick up supplies that Mrs. Ford had ordered. The thread, button, ribbons, and fringe were wrapped into one parcel before Addy left the store. Addy held on to her parcel tightly as she stepped around the slush and dirty puddles in the street. On her way to her next stop, she passed the windows of Mr. Del Monte's second-hand shop. Sometimes she and Momma went there to look for clothes or pots and pans. The socks Addy had on today had come from Mr. Del Monte's. There was a small darn in the heel of one sock, but the other one was good as new. Addy stopped for a minute to look at the window. Lying among the used shoes, wool cap, and old belts was a bright patch of red cloth. It looked like the corner of a scarf, but most of it was hidden behind a rusty tea kettle. Addy went inside to take a closer look. Mr. Del Monte recognized her right away. "Good morning, Addy," he said in his jolly way. "What brings you in here today?" "Can I see that red scarf in the window?" Addy asked. Mr. Del Monte reached into the window to display and move the tea kettle so he could lift out the scarf and hand it to Addy. "It's a beauty," he said. "Hardly looks worn." Addy unfolded the scarf. It was like new. The red fabric was soft and smooth. Addy held it up to her cheek. Right then she knew she wanted to have Momma to have the scarf. "Momma should have something pretty like this," thought Addy. "She works so hard. She looks so beautiful in this when we go to the Christmas service at church." Addy was almost afraid to ask about the price, but she looked up at Mr. Del Monte. "How much does it cost?" she asked. 20 cents, answered Mr. Del Monte. "It's a good price for something that looks like it's never been worn." Addy was discouraged. She didn't have 20 cents, but she had to buy the scarf somehow. "Please, Mr. Del Monte," she said, "would you put this away for me? I'm going to try my best to get the money to buy it." "Well, I put it back behind that rusty tea kettle again," answered Mr. Del Monte. "You're the only person who spotted it since I put it in the window last week. I'll probably stay there longer." "I hope so," said Addy, as she carefully folded the scarf and handed it back to Mr. Del Monte. The feel of the soft material and its bright red color stayed in Addy's mind as she headed back to Mrs. Ford's shop. "How am I going to get 20 cents? She wondered. Back at the shop, Mrs. Ford had 3 packages for her to deliver, all wrapped in brown paper. "These go to Society Hill," said Mrs. Ford, as she handed them to Addy. "Be careful, don't splash mud on them." "Yes, ma'am." The streets were busier that afternoon than they were in the morning. Addy had to dodge around throngs of people bustling in and out of shops. Her packages were clumsy, and she worried about dropping them on sloppy sidewalks. After Mom had worked so hard, Addy wanted to sure the dresses were delivered in perfect condition. The last delivery was on Spruce Street. As Addy walked toward the address, she saw an old man lighting street lamps. The lights cast a golden glow on the wet sidewalks. When Addy got to the house, she rang the bell and waited for the big door. A maid finally came, and Addy handed her the last bundle. "This is from Mrs. Ford's shop," she said proudly. The maid took the package and handed Addy 5 pennies. Addy thanked her and turned away. As she walked back down Spruce Street, she curled her fingers around the coins inside her mitten. Suddenly, Addy had an idea. She decided to stop by Mr. Del Monte's shop on the way home, just to make sure the soft red scarf was still there. As she approached the store, Mr. Del Monte was just locking up. "Don't worry, Addy," he said. "The scarf is still here. I moved it off to the corner a bit, but you can see it if you know where to look." The two of them stood at the window together. Addy headed down the street, but Mr. Del Monte headed down the street, but Addy stayed at the window, thinking about her idea. "If I put half my tips in the milk bottle," she thought, "keep the other half, maybe I can save enough money to buy the scarf for Momma." Addy lingered a little longer, staring at the scarf in the fading light, thinking how pretty Momma would look in it. Then she headed back to Mrs. Ford's shop. By the time she got to the shop, her feet were numb with cold and her nose was frozen. "You look frozen stiff, child," said said Mrs. Ford, peering above her spectacles. Mrs. Ford had a tape measure draped around her neck. Mama had a ribbon thrown across one shoulder as she sewed fringe on the end of a sash. They looked busy, and Addy knew she couldn't bother them. Mama, can I please light the stove upstairs now? Asked Addy. Please? No, Addy, Mama answered. You know we don't light the stove until I start cooking supper. You head on upstairs. I'll be up as soon as I finish this sash. Then we'll light the stove. Yes, Mama, said Addy. As she headed out the door, she heard Mrs. Ford ask Mama, how is everything up in the garret? Everything is fine, Mama answered quickly. We get by. Addy wanted to turn around and tell Mrs. Ford the truth, that it was freezing in the garret and dark and sometimes very lonely. On the plantation, Addy had been allowed to spend more time with Mama than she was here. She wanted to tell Mrs. Ford about the broken window and the snow was on the floor. But Addy knew Mama would not want her to complain. We get by, Addy said softly to herself as she climbed up the stairs. When she got to the top, she lit the candle on the table. When Addy turned her mitten upside down and let the tip money fall on the table, she brought the milk bottle out from behind the stove and set it next to the money. Then Addy went over to the bed and lifted up the corner of the mattress. There she found the kerchief that she had brought from the plantation when she and Mama escaped from slavery. Tied in one corner was the half-dime Uncle Solomon had given her. It was the only money they had when they headed north for freedom. Freedom's got its cost, Uncle Solomon had said when he gave it to Addy. She had saved it for something very special, something important. Addy brought the kerchief over to the table and divided her tip money into two piles. She dropped one pile into the milk bottle and then carefully tied the other coins into the corner of her kerchief. With Uncle Solomon's half-dime, she had 10 cents in the kerchief. That was half what she needed for Mama's red scarf. I'm halfway there, Addy thought to herself. The thought made her happy. She didn't think about the cold. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. I will see you later.